Welcome to r/Payback. The tangled web of my family's history has always been shrouded in mystery and heartbreak. Years ago, my parents' marriage came crashing down, leading to a bitter divorce filing that marked the beginning of a dark chapter none of us could have imagined. It was during those painful years that the seeds of tragedy were planted, seeds that would sprout into something unimaginable. The key players in this story revolve around a few crucial people: my father, Billy, Sherry, and Linda. My dad was a man I thought I knew well, but as events unfolded, I realized how little I truly understood. Billy was entwined with all of them in ways that would later raise countless questions. Sherry was my father's partner at the time of the incident that shook our family to its core, a night of betrayal, violence, and death that would forever alter our lives. Linda was someone who had a close connection to Billy and later became a crucial figure in unraveling the mystery. Their relationships were complex, full of tension and secrets. It all started with the affair that triggered the tragedy, a murder-suicide that left a trail of devastation. The details were murky, whispered through family members who struggled to cope with the shock. Divorce filings had already been in motion when the violence erupted, leaving everyone torn between grief and suspicion. The impact on our family was profound. We were left grappling not just with the loss, but with the unanswered questions. Questions about what really happened that night and who was truly responsible. It felt like living in the shadow of a dark secret, with every conversation and family gathering carrying an unspoken weight. Billy's role in the whole saga was especially confusing. His behavior after the tragedy seemed off, too controlled, too calculated. Yet, he was the one who found the bodies that night, or so he said. His version of events became the official story, but it never quite sat right with many of us. Linda's perspective added another layer of complexity. She shared insights that contradicted what Billy said and revealed details that made me question everything I had believed. Through her eyes, I began to see a different picture, one where fear and manipulation played a bigger role than anyone had admitted. This story isn't just about what happened on that fateful night. It's about how the ripple effects of those events tore through our family, changing relationships and leaving scars that haven't healed. It's about uncovering the truth hidden beneath years of denial and silence. As I started piecing together the fragments of that night, I realized that the surface story was just the beginning. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered about Billy's past and the strange coincidences that surrounded him. What had seemed like a tragic accident now looked like something much darker. This is the story of how a family was broken, how secrets were buried, and how one person's determination to uncover the truth began to unravel a web of lies and deception. It's a story that I never wanted to tell but can no longer ignore. Linda was shaken to her core. After witnessing Billy's strange behavior and hearing his unsettling story on that fateful night, she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut. Something was terribly wrong. Determined to get answers, she decided to take matters into her own hands and visit the police department herself. Her goal was clear: to share her concerns and push for a deeper investigation into what had happened. Walking into the police department, Linda felt a mix of hope and dread. She was greeted by the lead investigator on my dad's case, now the deputy chief of the department, a man who, on paper, seemed like the perfect person to listen. But from the moment she started explaining her suspicions, she noticed something unsettling. The officer's disinterest was palpable. He barely made eye contact, his body language dismissive. It felt as if he had already made up his mind, and no amount of pleading or evidence would change that. Linda described her interaction with the deputy chief as frustrating and disheartening. He didn't overtly oppose her claims, but there was a distinct reluctance to act. It seemed that admitting Billy's guilt would expose not just one failure, but multiple shortcomings in their previous investigations. For him, sweeping things under the rug was easier than reopening old wounds. This attitude reflected a deeper systemic problem, one where police officers preferred to avoid complicated cases that could tarnish their records or lead to political backlash. The department's response wasn't just a single man's indifference, it was a culture of apathy and avoidance. Linda's persistence clashed harshly with this cold reality. She was met with bureaucratic roadblocks, endless paperwork delays, and an overall lack of urgency. Yet, despite the cold shoulder, Linda refused to back down. She knew that if she didn't speak up, the truth would be buried forever, and Billy's strange pattern of involvement in so many deaths might never be fully understood. Her determination was fueled not only by justice for my dad and Sherry, but by a need to protect others who might be at risk. The contrast between Linda's passion and the police's apathy was striking. It was a battle between a grieving woman's desperate search for answers and a law enforcement system more interested in closing cases than uncovering uncomfortable truths. Linda's story became a symbol of the broader failures in the system, where victims and their families were often left feeling powerless. Despite these obstacles, Linda's efforts planted the seeds for future inquiries. She connected with investigative journalists and kept the conversation alive in small, quiet ways that slowly built momentum. Though the police department remained resistant, her voice was becoming harder to ignore. In the end, Linda's journey to the police department revealed more than just official indifference. It exposed the flaws in a system designed to protect, yet sometimes failing the very people it was meant to serve. Her story is a reminder that truth often requires persistence against powerful resistance. After the unsettling death of the second girlfriend, Billy's life seemed to spiral even further into mystery and suspicion. What shocked many was that not long after, Billy began an unexpected and controversial relationship, this time with Linda's own mother, a woman whose health was fragile and whose life was already hanging by a thread. Linda was stunned when she found out. The idea that Billy, after losing 2 girlfriends under questionable circumstances, would start seeing her mother was almost unthinkable. The timing and nature of this relationship raised more questions than answers, adding a new layer of tension within the family. Her mother had long struggled with severe alcoholism and serious health problems. She was described as frail, weighing no more than 75 pounds toward the end of her life. Many whispered that Billy, knowing her vulnerability, may have withheld necessary medication, hastening her decline. The suspicion was heavy, though no formal charges ever surfaced. The circumstances around her death were officially ruled accidental, but the family wasn't convinced. This period saw a dramatic escalation in conflicts between Billy and Linda. Public arguments erupted, exposing raw emotions and deep-seated resentment. One particularly explosive fight unfolded just days after the mother-in-law's death, during which Billy reportedly exclaimed, "I let the bee die and everything she has is mine." These words not only shocked those who heard them, but also cemented a belief that something sinister was at play. The tensions didn't just stop at words. Family members began to fracture under the strain of suspicion and mistrust. Linda and her daughters were haunted by the pattern of tragedies surrounding Billy, and many feared what else might be lurking beneath the surface. The relationships within the family grew strained as accusations and doubts festered. Throughout this time, hints of darker secrets surfaced. Whispers about money, hidden motives, and unspoken deals added to the uneasy atmosphere. Some wondered if Billy's connections with the women in his life were less about love and more about control or gain. The mysterious deaths, coupled with his increasingly erratic behavior, painted a portrait of a man who was far from innocent. Even though the deaths were officially closed as accidents or natural causes, the family's pain and suspicions refused to be silenced. Linda's resolve only hardened as she sought to uncover the truth behind the scenes. Her mother's death was not just a personal loss, but a critical piece in a puzzle that refused to fit neatly. What made it worse was how Billy seemed to evade full accountability at every turn. The public fights, the family arguments, and the unspoken tension revealed a man who was both deeply flawed and deeply feared. For Linda and her daughters, the shadow of Billy's actions stretched long and dark. In the end, this chapter of the story marked a turning point, not just in the narrative of death and suspicion, but in the unraveling of a family torn apart by tragedy and mistrust. The death of the mother-in-law was more than just another loss. It was a catalyst that exposed just how deep the cracks had grown in the family's foundation. After years of unanswered questions and mounting suspicions, Opie, who had been quietly observing and piecing together the puzzle, decided it was time to take a more active role. Teaming up with an investigative journalist, Opie aimed to dig deeper into the tangled web surrounding Billy and the tragic events that had shattered so many lives. At first, it seemed promising. The journalist had experience navigating bureaucratic obstacles and accessing public records, but almost immediately, they hit roadblocks. Police departments were slow to respond, documents were withheld or mysteriously missing, and official records were incomplete. Despite repeated requests under Freedom of Information laws, the files related to Billy's involvement in these incidents remained frustratingly elusive. This lack of transparency only fueled Opie's determination. The more the authorities stonewalled, the more suspicious things appeared. It was as if someone was deliberately keeping information under wraps, perhaps to protect a fragile reputation, or worse, to shield a guilty party. Amid these frustrations, another troubling development emerged. Billy had vanished. He disappeared without a trace. For years, he had been an ever-present, if unsettling figure in the family's life. But now, not only was he missing physically, but he had also stopped fulfilling basic responsibilities. Child support payments for his youngest daughter ceased in 2020, and his absence at key family moments, most notably his eldest daughter's wedding last year, was deeply felt. Billy's disappearance created a void, both practical and emotional. For the family, it was a double-edged sword. On one hand, his absence relieved some immediate tensions and confrontations. On the other, it left many questions unanswered and opened wounds that were never properly healed. Opie found themselves caught in a complex emotional crossfire. The frustration of chasing elusive facts mingled with grief and anger. Without Billy present, it was harder to hold anyone accountable, to confront the man many believed was at the center of these tragedies. Yet, Opie's resolve did not waver. They understood that truth often requires persistence, especially when dealing with powerful systems and people who prefer to stay hidden. Even without Billy's presence, the story had to be told, the silence broken. The emotional toll on the family was profound. Years of pain, suspicion, and loss weighed heavily on everyone involved. Opie, in particular, felt the burden keenly, not only as an investigator but as someone who had to confront their own family's dark history. In the quiet moments, Opie reflected on the cost of all this, the fractured relationships, the lingering doubts, and the shadow of a man who seemed to bring tragedy wherever he went. Yet, beneath the sorrow was a fierce hope that exposing the truth, no matter how painful, could finally bring some measure of justice and healing. The journey was far from over. Despite the setbacks, Opie and the investigative journalist continued their work, refusing to let the story fade into silence. For them, and for the family still searching for answers, the fight for truth was the only path forward. The day I finally sat down with the lead investigator on my dad's case, the deputy chief of the police department, felt surreal. After years of suspicion, heartbreak, and unanswered questions, I had the chance to hear directly from the man who had been at the center of the investigation. I arrived with my mom, both of us bracing for what might come. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours, and it was a mix of shocking revelations, frustrating dead ends, and moments of clarity. The deputy chief was polite and attentive, but firm in his belief that the original conclusions were sound. According to him, the evidence his team gathered supported the judgment that my dad's death was a suicide. He acknowledged that our concerns about Billy's strange behavior and the other deaths on the block were valid in terms of suspicion, but he insisted that the investigations had uncovered nothing that would warrant reopening the case. To him, everything was circumstantial. He recounted the details surrounding the second girlfriend's death, the one found at the bottom of the stairs. The story I had heard painted a dark, suspicious picture, but the deputy chief explained that, based on medical reports and witness accounts, it was ruled an accidental death. The woman had been intoxicated and suffered from health issues that likely contributed to her fall. Her body bore numerous bruises, old and new, which complicated the narrative but did not conclusively point to foul play. Those close to her described her as someone who was often hurt, whether through accidents or risky behavior. What stood out most during our meeting was when he pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table. Inside was an 8x10 photograph of my dad's hands resting in his lap, drenched in blood, the pistol still held loosely in his fingers. I stared at the image. My breath caught in my throat. Up until then, I had imagined the scene in my mind, but seeing the graphic photo shattered any illusions. The blood pooled heavily around his hands, which didn't look natural, too neat, almost staged. I tried to voice my doubts about how the scene had been arranged, explaining the conflicting stories Billy had told over time. Sometimes he said my dad was lying down with the gun beside him, other times sitting with it in his lap or on the ground. It felt like Billy was controlling the narrative, molding it to fit a version of events that served him. The deputy chief listened but maintained that without concrete proof, suspicion alone wasn't enough. Still, he admitted that Billy was an unusual character, unlucky, strange, and not very cooperative during investigations. The cop recalled how Billy had been standoffish in the case of the second girlfriend's death, reluctant to provide information, which only fueled rumors and doubts. Yet, the lack of physical evidence meant the police had no grounds to press charges or pursue further inquiries. I shared with him the troubling updates about Billy's disappearance, how he had vanished without a trace, stopped paying child support for his youngest daughter, and hadn't shown up to important family milestones like his eldest daughter's wedding. The deputy chief assured us that the department had tracked Billy down through child support enforcement, which had started garnishing his wages. It was a small victory in a long, painful saga. Throughout the meeting, the deputy chief was careful to separate facts from speculation, but didn't dismiss our feelings outright. He seemed to understand the emotional toll this ordeal had taken on me and my family. Yet he was bound by the evidence, or lack thereof. It was clear that law enforcement was caught between public suspicion and the strict standards required to pursue a criminal case. As the meeting ended, I left with mixed emotions. On one hand, I had finally seen the crime scene photos and spoken with the man who had led the investigation, gaining insight into the police perspective. On the other, the unresolved questions and inconsistencies gnawed at me. Was Billy really innocent, or had he manipulated the system and those around him? The truth remained elusive, hiding beneath layers of grief, fear, and unanswered doubts. Looking back over the years of turmoil, investigations, and heartache, I find myself trapped between hope and despair. The story of my dad's death and all the strange events surrounding Billy still feels incomplete. Even with the official reports and police meetings, many pieces don't fit quite right. The shadows of suspicion linger, coloring every memory and interaction. One question that keeps haunting me is the role of Sherry's brother. His absence during critical moments, his silence when his sister's house was swarmed with emergency vehicles. It all feels too convenient. Could he have been involved? Maybe not directly in the tragedy itself, but perhaps in coaxing Billy into a plan fueled by promises of financial gain. It's a theory I wrestle with, but can't prove. The timeline of deaths, my dad, Sherry, the girlfriends, and the mother-in-law, all clustered on the same street within just a few years, defies easy explanation. Is it just an unlucky coincidence, or something far darker? Public whispers and private conversations have fueled rumors, but without evidence, it's a silent storm. What weighs heaviest on me is the toll this entire saga has taken on our family. The pain of losing my dad was compounded by the suspicion and division that followed. Trust was shattered, and relationships strained under the weight of doubt. Linda's struggles, Billy's disappearance, and the unraveling of so many lives paint a portrait of devastation that extends far beyond any single event. Yet amidst all this darkness, there's a fierce desire for truth and justice. Not just for my dad, but for everyone caught in this web. Sherry, the girlfriends, the mother-in-law, and the families left behind. We deserve answers, even if those answers are painful. The weight of suspicion is heavy, and sometimes I wonder if it will ever lift. But I've learned that truth isn't always neat or comforting. Sometimes it's messy, elusive, and slow to surface. Until then, I carry these questions, hoping that one day the full story will come to light, and those who suffered will finally find peace. That wraps up today's episode of r/Payback. If you enjoyed the ride, don't forget to subscribe for more epic stories.